All right. Looks like we're diving deep into JavaScript today.
Oh, yeah, tons of notes, code snippets, even a practice interview test.
Someone's getting serious about their JS skills.
It's great to see. JavaScript is such a dynamic language.
Yeah, and it looks like you've already got those fundamentals down.
Variables, objects, functions, the core stuff.
But what I'm really seeing here are these notes on higher order functions.
Ah, that's where things get interesting.
Yeah, those always seemed a bit tricky to me.
First-class citizens,
First-class citizens.
you can pass them as arguments to other functions. Really opens up a lot of flexibility.
So instead of just repeating the same code over and over.
Exactly. You can adapt and reuse code for different situations.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's like building a toolbox full of specialized tools for your code.
Ah, I like that. And speaking of writing better code, you've also got notes on scope, right?
Yes, scope.
I know they can be a bit confusing.
Yeah, but it's so important for avoiding those tricky bugs.
So scope basically defines where variables can be accessed.
And modified, yeah. Helps keep your code clean and predictable.
Otherwise, those variables start changing values out of nowhere.
Exactly. It's like making sure your variables are staying in their lanes on the coding highway.
Right, got to avoid those collisions. Now, I'm also seeing a section here on array methods.
Map, filter, reduce, those are powerful tools.
Seems like you're really mastering those, at least from your notes.
They're essential for working with lists of data, especially as your applications grow.
Yeah, I can imagine. Way better than writing all that logic manually.
Much more concise and efficient, for sure.
And then, of course, those notes on DOM methods and event listeners.
That's where JavaScript really interacts with the web page.
Dynamically updating the content, style, all based on user actions, right?
It's like bringing your code to life in the browser.
Okay, so let's tie all these fundamental pieces back to what you're working towards here.
Looks like we've got a practice interview test. Maybe prepping for a coding interview.
Yeah, makes sense. Those interviewers love to focus on the fundamentals.
They're the foundation of any good JavaScript developer.
Right, so let's take a look at some of these key questions.
Sure. What are you thinking?
Well, you've got a whole section on variable declarations.
Oh, with var, let, and const. Those can be a bit tricky.
Yeah, they seem straightforward, but they can trip people up.
The differences in scope and mutability, you gotta be careful with those.
Right, like whether a variable's value can be changed after it's assigned.
Exactly. var allows reassignment, but has function scope.
Let is similar, but has block scope.
And then there's const for when you want values to stay constant.
So it's all about choosing the right tool for the job, I guess.
Absolutely. Writing predictable and maintainable code.
Now, you've also got some notes on primitive data types.
The basics, numbers, strings, booleans.
Essential building blocks for any JavaScript program.
Demonstrates a fundamental understanding of how JavaScript handles data.
Okay, let's jump into some of these tougher questions.
You mean like the ones about hoisting?
Yeah, hoisting, always a fun one.
How variable and function declarations are lifted to the top of their scope.
Right. It can lead to some unexpected behavior if you're not careful.
But understanding it can make you a much more effective developer.
Absolutely. And then there are closures.
Closures, a classic.
We touched on them briefly before. Functions remembering variables from their surrounding scope.
Even after the outer function has finished executing.
Powerful stuff, enabling things like data encapsulation and private variables.
Essential for building modular and maintainable code.
Okay, before we move on from this interview prep, any tips for our listener on how to approach these questions?
Oh, definitely. Don't just try to memorize answers.
Yeah, interviewers can see right through that.
Focus on understanding the why, the underlying concepts.
It's about showing your problem-solving skills.
And how you think like a developer, exactly.
Awesome. Now, I think it's time to shift gears a bit and talk about syntax and style conventions.
The finer points of writing clean code.
They might seem like small details.
But they make a huge difference in readability and maintainability.
Right, like using the correct casing conventions.
Camel case for variables, Pascal case for classes, snake case for constants.
It helps make your code more organized and easier to understand.
Exactly. It's like using proper grammar and punctuation in writing.
Makes your code flow better, easier for others to read.
And while we're on the topic of clean code, we should talk about error handling.
Oh, nobody likes crashes and unexpected issues.
But they happen, so we gotta get prepared.
Oh, it looks like you've got some notes here on try.catch blocks.
Yes, those are essential for gracefully handling errors.
So the try block contains the code that might throw an error.
And the catch block handles it if it occurs,
Like a safety net for your code.
preventing the entire application from crashing.
keeping things running smoothly for the user.
That's the goal. Now let's see, what else have we got here? Good coding practices.
Those habits that separate the good code from the great code?
More than just functionality, it's about writing code that's easy to understand and maintain.
Meaningful variable names, clear comments, consistent formatting.
It all contributes to a better code base.
Like the difference between a cluttered room and an organized space.
Exactly. Makes it much easier to work with and collaborate on.
Speaking of collaboration, I'm noticing some notes on Git here.
The version control system. Can't live without it.
A time machine for your code, tracking changes, reverting back to previous versions.
Essential for any developer working on projects of any size, especially with others.
Yeah, it's all about collaboration and making sure everyone's on the same page.
And working with the latest code, exactly. Looks like you're pretty comfortable with the basics of JavaScript now.
Yeah, feeling good about those fundamentals.
So, ready to dive deeper into some of these advanced concepts.
Definitely, bring it on.
All right, well, your notes here suggest you're interested in closures.
Yeah, closures always seemed a bit mysterious to me.
They can be tricky, but once you get them, they're incredibly powerful.
So what exactly is a closure?
It's basically a function's ability to remember the environment in which it was created.
Even after the outer function completes?
Exactly. It retains access to variables and functions from that outer scope.
So it's like carrying a piece of its history with it.
You got it. And this allows for some really cool things like creating private variables.
Private variables. I thought JavaScript didn't really have those.
Well, not in the traditional sense, but closures can simulate that behavior.
So I could use a closure to make a variable only accessible within a specific function.
Precisely, hiding it from other parts of your code, like a little secret.
I could see how that would be useful for data privacy and things like that.
Absolutely. It helps maintain control over how your code interacts with variables.
Okay, that makes sense.
Think of it like building a secure vault for your data.
A JavaScript vault. I like it.
And closures are also super useful for event handlers and callbacks.
Right. I saw that in my notes, but I wasn't sure how it all fit together.
Well, imagine you have a button that updates a counter when clicked.
Okay, I'm following.
You'd use an event listener to detect the click, but the function that handles that click needs access to the counter variable, right?
Yeah, to actually update it.
Exactly, and closures make sure that happens smoothly, even if other parts of your code are messing with similar variables.
So closures help prevent conflicts and keep things organized.
You got it. Now, let's move on to modules, another important concept for building larger applications.
Yeah, modules. I know they're all about breaking your code into smaller, more manageable pieces.
Like compartments in a ship, each with a specific purpose.
So instead of one giant file with all my code,
You can divide it into separate modules, each with its own focused functionality.
makes it easier to understand, test, and maintain, right?
Exactly, and it encourages code reuse, too.
Oh, how so?
You can create modules for common tasks and import them into other parts of your project.
So you don't have to write the same code over and over.
Exactly, very efficient. But we need a way to control what parts of a module are accessible from the outside.
Right, to prevent conflicts and keep things organized.
That's where exports and imports come in.
I've heard of those, but I'm not sure I fully understand.
Basically, each module can declare which functions, classes, or variables it wants to make public.
So it's like a public interface for the module.
Precisely. And anything not exported stays private, hidden within the module.
Okay, that makes sense. Modules. A way to organize, scale, and reuse your code.
You got it. Now let's tackle a big one. Asynchronous programming.
Oh yeah, asynchronous JavaScript, essential, but can be a bit tricky.
Especially when dealing with those pesky callbacks.
Callback hell.
Fortunately, we have much better tools now, like promises.
I've heard of promises, but I'm not quite sure what they are.
Think of a promise as representing the eventual result of an asynchronous operation.
Whether it succeeds or fails.
Exactly. It provides a clean way to handle the outcome of those tasks.
So much better than those nested callbacks.
And then we have async-await, the current gold standard.
Async-await, that one's still a bit fuzzy for me.
It builds on promises, making asynchronous code even more readable and intuitive.
Like writing synchronous code, even though it's not.
You got it. It's
Yeah.
like having a personal assistant handling all the asynchronous details behind the scenes.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Async-await really simplifies working with promises.
Making your code more concise and less error-prone.
And much easier to understand, which is always a good thing.
Absolutely. So closures, modules, asynchronous programming, these are all key concepts for building modern JavaScript applications.
You're catching on quickly. You've got a good grasp of these advanced topics.
Thanks, I'm starting to see how they all fit together.
That's what it's all about, connecting the dots and building up your skills.
I'm excited to keep learning and see where this JavaScript journey takes me.
That's the spirit. There's always something new to discover in the world of JavaScript.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground already.
From fundamentals to those advanced techniques like closures, modules, and asynchronous programming.
Right, but now I'm curious about some of those tools and techniques that can really make you a JavaScript expert.
Well, there are certainly some specialized areas that can boost your coding efficiency and problem solving.
For sure. Like, what about regular expressions? Those have always seemed a bit intimidating to me.
Ah, yes, regular expressions, or regex for short.
They look like secret codes, but I know they're super powerful for working with text.
They are. They're patterns you use to search, match, and manipulate strings.
So like a super-powered find and replace.
Kinda, but regex can do so much more than that.
Like what?
Well, you can match complex patterns, validate user input, extract specific data, all sorts of things.
So if I'm building a form that asks for an email address, I could use regex to make sure it's in the right format.
Exactly. You define a pattern that matches a valid email, and then check the user's input against it.
That makes sense. Helps prevent errors and keeps the data clean.
Precisely. And regex is also really useful for things like web scraping.
Oh yeah, I can see that. Extracting specific info from a web page.
Lots of possibilities with regex once you get the hang of it.
Okay, so regex, powerful and versatile. I'll have to dive into that more.
Definitely worth exploring. Now, what about functional programming?
Ah, yes. Functional programming is all the rage these days.
It does seem to be gaining a lot of traction.
But I'll be honest, I'm still a bit fuzzy on what it actually means.
Well, it emphasizes things like pure functions, immutability, and a declarative style.
Okay, break that down for me. What are pure functions?
A pure function always produces the same output for the same input.
Makes sense, like a mathematical function.
Exactly. And it has no side effects, meaning it doesn't change anything outside of its own scope.
Okay, I'm following so far.
And then immutability means that data can't be changed after it's created.
So you always create new data structures instead of modifying existing ones.
Precisely. It helps make your code more predictable and easier to reason about.
But how do these ideas actually play out in real JavaScript code?
Well, many of those array methods we discussed earlier, like map, filter, and reduce, are based on functional principles.
Oh, right, they create new arrays instead of changing the original.
Exactly, a very functional approach.
Okay, so functional programming, a different way of thinking about code, leading to cleaner, more predictable results.
It's a paradigm shift, but a valuable one for sure.
Awesome. Now, before we wrap things up, I'd love to hear about some of those new features in modern JavaScript.
Oh, there's always something new and exciting happening in the world of JavaScript.
I know it's a constantly evolving language.
One big area has been new syntax and features that make the language more expressive.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, we have let and const for declaring variables.
Right. More control over scope and preventing accidental reassignment.
Then there are arrow functions, a more concise way to write functions.
Especially handy for those callbacks and higher order functions.
Exactly. And then we have template literals, making it easier to work with strings.
Those are definitely game changers. What else is new?
Destructuring assignments, a neat way to extract values from objects and arrays.
Oh, I've seen those. Pretty handy.
And then there are classes, bringing a more object-oriented approach to JavaScript.
Wow, JavaScript has come a long way.
It certainly has, and the evolution continues.
There's always something new to learn.
The key is to stay curious and keep practicing.
Absolutely. This deep dive has been amazing. So much valuable information.
Well, you've been a great student, grasping these concepts quickly.
Thanks. I'm excited to put it all into practice.
That's what it's all about, building real-world projects and seeing what you can create.
Exactly. And who knows what new JavaScript adventures await us in the future.
The possibilities are endless. That's the beauty of it.
I can't wait. Well, thanks for joining us on this JavaScript journey.
It's been a pleasure. Happy coding.